Daniel Reeves had spent his whole life reading weather the way most people read headlines, so when the sky over Milford County curdled into the color of a bruise that afternoon, he didn't need a phone or a radar screen to tell him a storm was rolling in fast. He was elbow-deep in a Cessna 182's engine compartment inside Reeves Field's Hangar B when the wind slammed hard enough to knock a mug off his workbench, and he calmly finished torquing a bolt before stepping outside to watch the clouds darken over his 11 acres of flat Nebraska farmland, a strip of runway 20-some miles from Lincoln that most locals didn't even know existed, having bought the old crop-dusting property 6 years earlier and patched it back to life piece by piece, cracked pavement, tired windsock, a leaking hangar roof and all. His 9-year-old daughter Maddie was due out of school at 3:15 and would head to the Fosters next door if he called ahead, a routine the neighbors had run for years without ever making him feel indebted. And he was still scanning the horizon when he caught an engine note that sounded wrong, a private jet breaking through the clouds, descending too fast, with an intermittent roughness underneath the whine that told him something was failing. Grabbing the radio, he cleared the aircraft, identified as Ashford 1, for an emergency landing, and watched a sleek Solara G700 slam down hard but controlled, taxiing toward him under the Ashford Aviation Group banner, a fleet operator worth hundreds of millions, run by Vivian Ashford, who'd taken the reins from her father at 26 after his stroke and had been a fixture in business magazines ever since. A staffer in a dark suit hurried down the stairs demanding transportation before Daniel cut him off to speak with the pilot, Sarah Doyle, who explained that Engine 2 had thrown a vibration signature out of Denver that worsened in the weather, and who visibly relaxed when she realized Daniel recognized the aircraft's engine type, the Corvain 9X, a model with a known history of hushed-up service bulletins. Then Vivian Ashford came down the stairs herself, dressed for a Chicago boardroom rather than a Nebraska downpour, phone still pressed to her ear, and when she finally looked at Daniel in his oil-stained jacket she asked, with unmistakable condescension, whether he was the mechanic, informed him she needed her plane back in the air within the hour for a billion-dollar deal, and offered no room for negotiation until he told her plainly he needed to inspect the engine first. 20 minutes into the inspection he found faint but unmistakable stress fractures spreading across the gearbox housing, and when he told her the aircraft was grounded, she demanded to know under what authority, visibly startled to learn he was one of only 4 mechanics nationally holding the specialized certification allowing him to ground aircraft of that engine type pending inspection. When persuasion failed, she tried money, offering to write him a check on the spot for whatever he made in a year if he'd sign a release, and he refused flatly, explaining that a cracked gearbox housing under load could trigger an uncontained failure capable of raining debris over a populated area, a risk no dollar figure could offset. She retreated to his office to make calls while he began digging through his own files, old service bulletins, industry emails, and a maintenance log a friend had sent him months earlier from an Ashford hub in Atlanta, compiled by a technician named Owen Marsh, who had flagged the identical vibration pattern on 4 separate aircraft over 6 weeks, each time cleared by the same supervisor's initials, VL, after which Marsh's name vanished from the records entirely. Suspecting a pattern of falsified clearances, Daniel called an old contact, Gregory Hale, a former federal certification official turned safety consultant, who confirmed the fracture pattern matched other unresolved cases and urged him not to release the aircraft under any pressure. That night, after picking up Maddie from the Fosters and putting her to bed, Daniel filed a formal fleet-level safety report with photographs, logs, and his own inspection notes, fully aware that doing so would set in motion something he couldn't take back. By morning the airfield was crowded with Corvain technicians, Ashford's maintenance VP Frank Delgado, and Vivian herself, now dressed down and visibly rattled, informing Daniel that the FAA had already opened a review overnight, his filing, and that she'd spoken with her operations chief Victor Lang, who insisted every maintenance flag on the fleet had been properly cleared. Daniel showed her the Atlanta records directly, walking her through Marsh's flags and the suspiciously same-day clearances that would have been physically impossible given the inspection's 4-hour minimum requirement, and watched her expression shift from disbelief to grim recognition as she ordered a voluntary fleet-wide inspection regardless of what regulators required, telling Daniel plainly that she wanted to find any problem before someone got hurt, not after. Over the following hours Daniel built a standardized inspection protocol with the Corvain field team, fielded a call from Gregory warning that the FAA's review board might order a nationwide grounding covering thousands of aircraft beyond Ashford's own fleet, and later confirmed exactly that when the mandatory directive landed that afternoon, press vans began circling, but Vivian handled the cameras herself. With composed, minimal statements, while Daniel avoided reporters entirely, the next morning brought word that a whistleblower inside Ashford's maintenance division had corroborated the Atlanta irregularities with internal emails, and that congressional staffers and journalists were now circling the story, prompting Gregory to gently suggest Daniel consider his own exposure, advice Daniel shrugged off, insisting he'd simply done his job. That same morning Vivian appeared at the hangar again. This time asking Daniel to join an emergency board meeting to explain the technical realities directly to executives who, she said, had accounting backgrounds and law degrees but no idea what's inside an engine. At the meeting, held at a downtown Lincoln hotel, board chairman Charles Winslow pressed Daniel for his assessment, and Daniel calmly laid out the danger of an uncontained gearbox failure at cruising altitude before turning to the Atlanta logs, at which point Victor Lang, seated stiffly at the table's end with a lawyer already retained, insisted all clearances had been properly documented, a claim that collapsed under Vivian's direct, unrelenting questioning about whether the 4 flagged aircraft had actually been inspected, to which Lang could only repeat that the documentation reflects compliance, an answer everyone in the room recognized as no answer at all. The board suspended him on the spot, and Daniel spent the rest of the session walking the executives through a realistic, methodical restoration timeline, warning against forcing an artificial deadline onto a process that couldn't safely absorb pressure, a recommendation the board formally adopted. Afterward, Vivian apologized for her tone on the tarmac, asked Daniel whether any dollar figure would have changed his answer, and accepted his honest response that it was never about the number. The cracks would still be there regardless of his bank balance. Over the following weeks the inspection results rolled in hub by hub: 16 flagged aircraft in Denver, 11 in Dallas, 9 in Miami, 23 in Chicago, totaling roughly half the fleet's Corvain-equipped jets, while the manufacturer quietly acknowledged its own internal engineering warnings had never matched the softened language of its public bulletins. Owen Marsh was tracked down in Tulsa, willing to share the emails and a threatening text from Lang's personal phone proving he'd been pushed out deliberately after raising the alarm 4 times. Lang resigned ahead of formal removal, disputing the characterization through his attorney but cooperating with investigators. The board brought in an independent oversight firm, at Vivian's insistence reporting directly to them rather than through her office, and asked Daniel to help select it, which he did, recommending the most rigorous of the 3 candidates. Meanwhile Daniel's ordinary work continued, finishing Walter Sims's Cessna Annual, fixing crop duster Ray Coburn's sloppy aileron hinge, deflecting a curious local reporter's interview request through Ray's daughter, while Maddie processed the sudden minor fame with the blunt seriousness only a 9-year-old could manage, drawing him standing beside a jet with a wrench in hand and asking if the airplane lady and her company would be okay. Vivian visited the hangar again 3 weeks later, this time alone and dressed plainly, to report that the disputed billion-dollar contract with client Holbrook had not only survived but expanded to 3 years and 6 dedicated aircraft after Holbrook specifically praised the company for grounding itself before regulators forced the issue, that the board had formally adopted every recommendation from the independent audit, and that 94 re-inspected aircraft were already back in clean, incident-free service. She then offered Daniel a newly created position, Director of Fleet Safety, reporting directly to the board with real independent authority, and, exactly as she predicted, he turned it down, not out of pride but because his life was built around Maddie's 12-mile school commute, the Fosters next door, and the clients who depended on him, though he agreed to a bounded consulting arrangement reviewing protocols and conducting spot audits without relocating. She admitted she'd rarely met anyone truly unmoved by money, and he corrected her gently. He'd noticed the offer, he just wasn't willing to trade an unsafe aircraft for it. Before she left with a promise to have legal draft simple, unpadded terms, and to personally reach out to Owen Marsh, who remained hesitant to trust Ashford's rebuilt safety structure, with Daniel's own endorsement that the new system was real. That evening, watching Maddie sleep with her latest collage of horses, a suspiciously horse-shaped cat, and a magazine cutout of a small plane pinned nearby, Daniel reflected that nothing about the past month had felt heroic in the way people kept calling it. He'd simply looked at a piece of metal, told the truth about what he saw, and refused to unknow it, and the quiet reward wasn't public credit but the ability to stand in his daughter's doorway without carrying the weight of a choice made wrong. Days later, Ray Coburn picked up his repaired plane, grunted his approval, and took off in a few hundred feet exactly as expected, while Daniel expected a call soon from Ashford's legal team about the consulting agreement, aware that the investigations into Lang and the manufacturer's engineering division would grind on for months in ways he no longer needed to track closely, and that what he still had, the hangar, the logbooks, the cracked runway, the windsock due for replacement, and the ordinary, unremarkable evenings with his daughter, was exactly the life he'd chosen to keep, framing her drawing that weekend as promised while another small aircraft climbed cleanly into the open Nebraska sky.